Welcome back to Beer Time with Books, Season 2.
Season 2?
Season 2.
Now that is cleared up by everybody involved. Welcome back, guys.
Thanks.
I love that we have seasons.
Seasons. I know, it's an official thing now. We kept talking about Season 1. It can't be Season 1 unless there's a Season 2. So now that there is officially a Season 2.
I feel better about
that was
having
a Season 1.
Good.
It's been just a little bit. In some of the gaps that we had in Season 1, this might have just been another episode down the line, but it's been about a month and a half, I suppose. It was like end of December when we finished Season 1, and now we are mid-February, just missed a holiday, about to hit another one. We're sandwiched right between Valentine's Day and President's Day. So
an auspicious time.
Very, yeah. You know, that thing that they talk about between Christmas and New Year's where you don't know what's going on. I feel that between Valentine's Day and President's Day.
I felt that between New Year's and now. Without this podcast, I just didn't know what day it was.
Just what time is it? Are we supposed to love each other or the presidents?
Are we supposed to be patriotic?
But anyway,
not even Washington's birthday, by the way.
Yeah, I know. This is like a classic Christmas situation.
It is. It is a classic Christmas situation.
It is the Christmas situation.
It is the Christmas situation. We are super excited to be back. If this is anybody's first episode, we have already talked about what our first 3 books are going to be for the podcast. So just in case that you hadn't listened to those previous episodes, which you definitely should, Season 1 is a gem.
I advise going back and listening to those episodes.
It's a gem, but we'll go through real quick if you are wanting to get on board and do some homework before the next few episodes. We'll just go around and talk about what each of the books were that we chose for Season 2. Today's episode is the first part of my first choice. This is Brian. We'll just do those introductions now. This is Brian, and my first choice was As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner.
And what beer are you drinking?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and do that too. This is a classic corner here. What are you drinking? I have a Boulevard unfiltered wheat beer. And had a new experience this morning. I talked about Tank 7 was one of my favorites from last season. I had a twist on that during bingo this morning with a Tank 7 mimosa, which was quite an interesting experience. A beer mosa, if you will.
It was only a month in between podcasts, but Jamie and Brian have actually aged 100 years and now go to Sunday morning bingo.
We went to bingo. We didn't win anything.
So yeah, this is Brian, As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, and Boulevard Wheat for the beer.
Perfect. I'm Jamie. My choice that we will be reading next after we finish As I Lay Dying is Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward, which in some ways we've been told relates to As I Lay Dying. So we'll see if that's true.
Yeah, that will be interesting to just have those back to back. Now getting more clear of a picture on what As I Lay Dying kind of looks like.
Yeah. And I'm drinking Yoga Pants. Operation Yoga Pants, actually, excuse me.
Oh.
That is a Martin City Brewing Co. gluten-free beer. It's fine. I don't think it'll be on my top beers for the end of the season.
Hey,
but
it's early. You
it
never
is only
we could have
episode
some
1.
terrible beers moving forward. Cool.
This is Danny. I'm also drinking a Yoga Pants, Martin City Brewing. And my pick is John Updike's Rabbit Run. I don't know anything. I didn't know anything about John Updike, and then I started reading a little about him, and I'm excited to read this book. I'm intrigued. I bought another book of his at a bookstore a few weeks ago called The Witches of Eastwick. It's like a witchy Like I don't even know. I don't know what it's about.
Book with witches in the title is a little witchy.
It's pretty witchy, but also like there's more than a hint of misogyny in it, and so I don't know. I'm intrigued. So we'll see how that goes.
Nice. And then to lay out the rest of the season, it'll be a similar structure to season 1, where number 4 will kind of be a committee decision. We'll probably have a guest. I think we have that person lined up, and we'll talk about that when we get a little bit closer, but that'll be one that we all choose. And then on the back half, it'll be another similar situation where the 3 of us will again choose a book each, and that'll round out 7 books for the season. So we are in it for the long haul again. We're going through this whole process and getting 7 more books on the docket. So strap in, guys.
I'm strapped in.
It's already done.
These seasons will be mirroring the seasons of my life until I die. So
season 50. Another 7 books.
More bingo.
We're really going to bingo for real.
Measuring your life in 7 books at a time. Another classic corner that we normally have. We'll try to keep this a little bit condensed just because there has been a bit of a gap. So maybe just keep it to like 1 or 2 significant things in the meantime. But we usually talk about what other media we've been consuming. And so since the last episode, if you just want to go through and just like I said, 1 or 2 things. Anybody want to start? I can start. You can start. Anybody?
I'll start.
Okay.
I've been watching a lot of Bon Appetit test kitchen videos. I don't know if you guys are on this train.
Bon Appetit.
But I read a lot about them on Twitter, but for a long time before I started watching, I didn't even know what people meant by test kitchen, and it's not really like cooking how-tos as much as it is like just like cute chefs, professional chefs, like fucking around in the kitchen, like in a fancy, nice Bon Appetit kitchen on like, it's just great. I love it. There's a lot of chaotic energy, and it's not organized, and they don't always post their recipes at the end. You have to like,
out of shame.
You have to like parse through them, like during the episodes. But they had Samin Nosrat, who wrote Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, and I made the focaccia recipe from that, and that was really fun. So I have been watching a lot of those, and I also started Watchmen on HBO. I'm like 2 or 3 episodes in.
Hell yeah.
So
I'm so curious about that. That was on a previous of my videos on the YouTube channel that this podcast gets posted to. That was one of my top books of the year when I read it. And I know that this is after the fact.
Yeah, Jamie and I talked about this briefly. I haven't read it, and so I know that this is post the story of the story of the book. And I mean, I think that there are probably a few things that I'm missing, I'm sure, but I'm also I'm enjoying like reading, watching it from, like having no knowledge of the universe. It's good. It's very like a lot and shocking. It is very a lot.
It is very a lot
and shocking, but I like it. Yeah.
Cool. One of the significant things that I had watched, and all 3 of us had really watched, but something that I wanted to talk about is The Good Place ended, and that last episode, these that's just all of us. Oh my god, that last episode of The Good Place. We're not going to spoil it for anybody, but it was one of the best series finales I've ever seen, and I said this to Jamie on like my analysis of it is that The Good Place I love as a show overall. Like, it's a fantastic show. I wouldn't say in comparison to other shows I have watched that the episode to episode quality was like as consistent as some of my other favorite shows of all time, but that series finale was one of the best series finales I have ever seen, which raises the stock of that show for me tenfold because the subject matter that they're covering, this is some like serious philosophy talking about afterlife issues and theories and all these different things. To wrap it up the way that they did is an incredible feat. And Jamie had specifically said, like, how did like a human being, or how did human beings create this? Or,
It's so
yeah, how is this not
perfect.
divinely inspired?
Yeah.
How did people who are living on this earth just think of that?
Mm-hmm.
How did they do it and make it good? I don't think that we are capable of making things that pure.
yeah, it's super good.
No.
And then also, just small plug because it's been an exciting thing. I had worked on the soundtrack of a documentary, and Danny had done some violin parts for that as well. So it was a pretty significant project since the end of the last episode. It's Teenager for Governor of the great state of Kansas. It's starting to get into some film festivals, so that's pretty cool, and it's been fun to watch that a couple of times and see it from the perspective, like, removed from it now of, like, I'm not working on it anymore, and so that's kind of a cool thing. And so maybe at some point when somebody listens to this episode, it'll be up somewhere. I don't know what the trajectory of that film is going to be, but it would be cool if it was up somewhere publicly. So yeah, there's been a couple things since the last episode. It's been pretty fun.
All right. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, as always, but especially recently, I've been like binging shorter podcasts. So I listened to Root of Evil, which is a true crime podcast that I really, really enjoyed. It's about the Black Dahlia murders.
I just finished it like 3 hours ago.
I told Danny to listen to it.
The chaos
Good
in this
timing.
podcast, friends.
The chaos is insane.
I was running with this. I was like running and listening to the last episode, and I was just like, I need to sit down.
Yeah.
I can't.
Oh, the last episode is stressful.
Oh, it was very stressful. I was like trying to go on a nice afternoon run, and it was very chaotic. Anyway,
but
just finished
it's about the Black Dahlia murders, which is a famous murder that happened in Los Angeles in like the 70s.
I think it was earlier than that.
Was it earlier than that?
It was like
60s,
I
50s?
thought it was like the 40s. Oh, I'll look it up.
I don't know.
I'll do a quick fact check.
But it was never solved, and this podcast essentially is being run by two sisters who believe that their grandfather was the one who committed the murder.
1947.
1947.
I thought
Oh,
it was the
that's
I also thought it was the 70s
That's
until I
way
looked it up.
earlier than I thought it was. But they think that their grandfather did it, and they have like a lot of proof that their grandfather did it, and their uncle is a homicide detective, coincidentally, and there's like all this stuff. But it's really interesting and genuinely very convincing. So that's a really good one. That's Root of Evil. And then I also have been listening to the second season of The Dream podcast, which the first season was about multi-level marketing schemes, pyramid schemes. And I listened to that like a year ago, and it was really good.
It's a pyramid opportunity. It's not a
It's a
scheme.
business endeavor, Jamie.
Excuse me, it's in the shape of a pyramid. How dare you? The second season is about the wellness industry, which has been really interesting to listen to in our day and age, where I feel like I'm bombarded by wellness things all the time.
And it feels like everyone is very unwell.
Yes. So that's been really interesting. She's talked a lot about especially how women are targeted by the wellness industry, and about like alternative treatments and alternative like ways to deal with your pregnancy, which is just traumatic and not good. So I've really enjoyed both of those.
Alternative ways to deal with your pregnancy.
Like not going to the hospital and
It just
doing
sounds
all these,
euphemistic
like,
for something very sinister.
I don't know. But it's good. I like it. So that's what I've been listening to, and whatever.
Wow, stuck the landing there.
We haven't potted in a while, guys.
And whatever.
So yeah, there were the classic corners of Beard Time with Books, and with those closing, that means we are opening the. I hate to use this again because I feel like I've said this in multiple times. The main meat of the episode.
Yeah, no, I delete that.
I'm gonna find a new way to.
You knew that it was bad.
Yeah,
Why
I know,
Did you say
but-
it?
You looked us both in the face and said it anyway.
I know that I shouldn't, but here I go.
Ew, God, how dare you?
But this is the part of the episode that we get to the books that we have been reading, and for today's episode, as mentioned earlier, we are talking about As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner.
Woo!
The enthusiasm is palpable.
You want to give us a quick synopsis,
Absolutely,
please?
absolutely.
I'm demanding it, actually.
I need it.
I actually need it.
Yeah, this may be the start of the discussion, the synopsis.
We're suddenly like, wait, what? Did that happen?
So, As I Lay Dying was published in 1930, just for some context as far as, the time period that we're operating in. I would assume that it's happening in a similar time period in the novel. This was actually Faulkner's 5th novel. And I read something, I think this was on Wikipedia, but just a quote that it was, Faulkner had said that he had written this novel in 6 weeks, only between midnight and 4 a.m., and reportedly didn't change a word.
Oh, yeah.
That makes sense to me.
He just chaotically wrote it and then was like, send it off.
It's like, I'm done.
It's ready.
I'm done with this
Like
forever.
a drunken text. Like, that's good. There
He
it
sent,
is.
and he wakes up. I sent that to the publisher.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
need to tell me
shit.
I did what?
Well, I will also say I didn't want to include this, but now that you've said that,
Oh.
he self-described this book as a tour de force. So good for him.
That sounds like a way I would describe a drunk text at 1 a.m.
Tour
A tour de force.
So
Man.
so with all of that, I feel like this book does have a bit of a reputation, and a lot of people.
Could you explain what you mean by that?
Well, I mean,
I'm just curious.
Just as far as like Jamie had even mentioned this to coworkers that we were reading this, and we'll get into this after the summary, but like there was a lot of reactions from them. The predominant thing being that they had said it was dense.
Yeah, I mentioned it at lunch one day. A room full of English teachers also, like, that is my job, everyone, for those who don't listen to the pod often. And I said, like, oh yeah, we're reading As I Lay Dying for my book club. And everyone in the room just went, oof.
A collective.
All
Yeah,
right.
so that's part of it, and then also for the reputations, like William Faulkner is a famous author, and
Sorry, he just like looked at me while he said that.
in case you were wondering,
Very
listen.
explanatory.
Okay, square one.
I just want a soundbite of
Roll
Brian
that.
saying Faulkner is a famous author.
Well, to the point I was making is that William Faulkner is a famous author, and this is one of his most famous books. So that would also be like part of the reputation that I'd be talking about. Like he definitely has multiple. This is his 5th novel, but of all of them, this is one that I hear talked about. Jamie's spitting up.
Jamie's trying to.
Look, guys, there was no malicious intent on this explanation. But that's the thing is with five novels, I'd say that there are like 2 that I specifically hear about more often than others. And so that's a little bit of the, the reputation that comes with a novel. And so with that, we'll start getting into the summary a little bit so we can dive deeper into this thing because I'd say, whether or not you call it dense, there's definitely some stylistic things at play here that affects the flow of the novel quite a bit, and it's not as conventional as some of the other novels that we read during the first season. So to start off here, Addie Bundren, she's the matriarch of the story, and we find out that she's going to die. So she's still alive at the beginning of the novel. Not for very long, but she is still alive at the beginning.
So supposedly she is the I in the As I Lay Dying.
Yeah.
We still have a whole half book left, guys.
We will see. This could be a twist ending here. But we do hear kind of morbidly that, she can hear and see her eldest son, Cash, making her coffin.
And that she wants to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a thing that is part of her request. And this is something from the very beginning that we're getting. And so it's not really starting off this book with a light, airy feel. This is something that definitely is carrying some weight. And it's very clear early on that this is going to be centered around the Bundren family, because we start getting introduced to all of them through various chapters where each of the family members gets, it just changes perspective, not always equally, but we hear from the entire family and their experiences with this time frame at the end of Addie's life. And through that, we start to get different perspectives on everybody and get to know each of them a little bit better, whether or not that's how people outside of the family see each of these individuals. We're at least getting, the family's deep perspective on each other. And also we start getting a few other characters as well. We get the town doctor gets a chapter, and he's obviously involved with the end of Addie's life. But I don't think he actually gets there in time for the end of her life to even do anything. And that's Peabody. And we also get introduced to the Tolls, which one of them is the second chapter. So it's kind of throwing you for a loop a little bit in that the rest of the book starts to get more into the other family members' perspective. But Cora Toll, who knows Addie, is the second and I think fourth chapter as well. And so they are added in as well. And as the novel progresses, we find out that Addie wants to be buried in Jefferson, Mississippi. And so the coffin is getting built to transport her to Jefferson, Mississippi. And soon after she dies, a rainstorm comes in. It's fairly strong. It starts to raise the water level of the rivers. It starts to affect the bridges that they'll have to cross over. And so a lot of the back part of this first half is their journey and finding out about some of these things that may be a problem. We do run into one of the bridges that gets flooded later on in this first half, which has them needing to find lodging elsewhere. And then finally, the last thing that we read is a flashback with the family. So that's including Addie as well while she was still alive, where we kind of get some backstory on Jewel, who was one of the sons, and how he acquired a horse, which was a point of contention amongst the family, which was honestly pretty revealing for their relationships and a little bit of their standing socioeconomically, because it was a big deal that Jewel wasn't pulling his weight for the family. Other people had to cover his work just so he could get a horse for himself. And so that's kind of where we left off for the very last chapter. Again, as we usually mention on these, we go about halfway through the book. And so if you're reading through, about halfway for us is that flashback. And that's where we end off. Anything else to add on that for the summary of it? I think it's fairly straightforward as far as the actual plot, maybe not the intricacies of it, but it really is just carrying Addie to Jefferson, Mississippi after she dies.
Yeah, that's
cool.
About right.
So yeah, let's go ahead and get into a couple of things. One of the things I want to visit is this claim that from your coworkers, Jamie, that one of the first things that they had talked about is that this novel is dense. And the thing is the novel is fairly short. We each have different editions here, but like mine's about 180. I think your guys' is...
I'm at 130-ish.
Or sorry, my whole book is 180.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mine's like 250.
Yeah.
I don't know, 260.
So it's fairly short, but that was a thing that they had said, is that, one of the predominant opinions was that it was dense. And so I kind of want to get your guys' take on that. Is, do you think it's dense? Why or why not? And yeah, just kind of explore that a little bit and the reasons as to why it is or why it maybe isn't, in your opinion.
I had a thought the last couple of days because I read the first section Surprise, surprise, pretty quickly, because I put things off until the last minute. But I also genuinely think that I couldn't have read this like spread out over many weeks. I think that realistically, if I were an average person who sat down with a book and read like 2 chapters or 3 chapters of it and then was going to decide if I was going to keep reading it or not, I wouldn't have. Because after like 3 chapters, I didn't know who anybody was. I didn't understand what was happening. I knew that there was somebody dying and her name was Addie. And that was about it. Like, I got some vague things and I had to reread a little bit. I think that reading it so quickly, and it's a short book, so it's not hard to read quickly, but reading it so quickly helped me figure out who things were because it backtracks so much. Like, it doesn't tell you who certain people are until you've seen them or heard them talk like 5 times, which I think is hard if you are just like casually reading this novel.
Yeah, it doesn't just lay out that like even all these characters are part of the Bundren family even.
Yeah, and like I was halfway through the section that we were reading and I said something to Brian about Dewey Dell being a son and he was like, she's a girl. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I realized that she was related to them finally, which was like a moment for me, but I thought they were all boys because no one had told me otherwise.
And you never get it from her perspective, and her introduction is just like most of the characters continuing to talk about her fanning Addie as she's dying.
Yeah.
And there's no other description apart from that, really.
Yeah. So I think that in that sense it is a dense book, like in that you really have to sit with it for a while to be able to understand what is going on and who the characters are. Not even really what's going on. The story, the plot is pretty simple. And I do think that you get a sense of that relatively quickly. But I think the characters and the way it's laid out is dense and complicated. And so many of the narratives of each chapter like backtrack on each other. Like, you'll get this section from Darl that will go 5 minutes into the next section from whoever, Toll. Like, they repeat things, but in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be confusing.
Especially in the back half, there starts to be a lot of crossover for things that are happening in that moment, especially when the chapters get short. Some of my chapters were only a page long, mm-hmm. and the shortest one was a sentence.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't as related to the events, but they were crossing over quite a bit, and because they don't know that each of them are thinking those things, they do repeat it, and then it starts to get into all these different things because it's different perspectives that can make it a little confusing too.
Yeah. So that's my opinion. I think that for a casual reader, I think that it is confusing and dense.
Yeah.
But
yeah, this doesn't really feel like a casual book for me. Like, I did start it, I mean, it was even just like a week and a half ago I started it. And like, I regretted taking a few days even, or like days in between, or even just like 20 pages a day. I like almost, I read like 60 pages yesterday, and that's like the part of the book that I understood the most was because I sat down and read it all at once, which again, it's not hard. I mean, it's a pretty fast read in that way. I don't know if I would call it dense as much as I would just call it convoluted. Like, it feels convoluted to me because of all the crossovers of like the timeline. I don't know, maybe that means it's dense, but like, I mean, when I think of dense, I think of like Tolstoy or like Mason and Dixon or something. Like, that's what I think of when I think of dense. This feels very quick to me. Dense implies to me like
that it takes
pages and pages, and it takes forever, and there's blocks of text, on all the pages. This is just like, it's very seamless with what's happening now, what's happening, like what happened in the past, like between dialogue and characters. It's very fluid in that way. So like dense implies a little bit more stuck to me. But regardless, like, I do think that, like, I agree. If I had just picked this up casually and been like, I want to see what this Faulkner stuff is about. Like, I don't know that I would have made it past the first few chapters because I barely knew what was going on after the first few chapters, and the only reason I actually even knew that Cora wasn't part of the family was because I read the synopsis on the back of the book, and it led me to expect the perspectives of people who weren't in the family. And I was like, I mean, those context clues were important to me, to my like understanding of what was happening. Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of I think the volume of characters also maybe would like contribute to making it feel a little bit dense, just because you meet a lot of people and you don't really know who any of them are. You barely know if they're part of the family or not. The only person you really know anything about for sure is that it's Addie and that she's dying.
Mm-hmm.
And
that is an early thing.
Yeah, like first chapter.
Yeah, first chapter it's talked about, but even from the perspective of like, you know, getting introduced to that, but not even knowing that the main action of the story is going to be the transport of Addie, like that isn't even revealed until a significant period of time afterward.
I kind of knew that going in.
Yeah,
like,
and I didn't, because I hadn't read a lot of like synopsis about it. So just from a pure like where it happens in the story, it does happen a bit later. Instead of them announcing that off the bat as like she's going to die and this, it's just like she's going to die. Here's all these other things that they're doing, and it's like, okay, it was her last wishes to be buried in Jefferson, so we're gonna go.
I actually went into the book not realizing that she was ever like living in the book, because I didn't look up a synopsis or anything, but I had just from people who have read it, who I know, like teachers at school, the way that they described it was like, oh, it's like funeral processes for someone in this family in the South. And so I thought that it was from everyone's perspective except for the woman who had died. Actually, I didn't even know it was a woman. I didn't know who Addie was, that it was like the mom when I was going into this.
And her death also is like, it in the book, it feels pretty inconsequential. Like it just, I mean, it's not like a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal in the story, but like, I feel it's not treated any differently. I don't feel
than anything else,
because it also feels that
it just like happens. She's alive and then she's not, and like it just is kind of, it's almost like she was dead from the start.
Yeah.
It feels like a lot of it was because they knew that she was dying, that like a lot of those initial like shocked reactions happened before the book even began, because a lot of it, even though there's still presumably going to be more grieving to be done, and even like in the wagon when I don't know how you guys pronounce it, Ants, A-N-S-E.
Yeah, I was pronouncing it Ants.
Yeah, I don't know if that's right.
So him just like having getting mad that his sons are laughing near their mother's body, like things like that. But a lot of the actual like grappling with her passing feels like it had happened earlier than the book, than the timeline of the book. So far. And so I think that has been an interesting thing to kind of like jump in the middle of that process, because how else would they know to be making the coffin? How else would she have made her last wishes, especially in the 1930s? I feel like that maybe wasn't always as applicable because of the progression of modern medicine. Maybe a lot of people didn't even have that opportunity to do that, to like make it known or even know like things could happen very quickly. And so that's just kind of an interesting perspective from there. So one of the things I wanted to get into as well is we've talked about this a little bit, that throughout the book we're getting chapters that are specifically labeled with a character's name, so we know there's no interpretation on what's going on in each chapter. We know whose perspective is predominant throughout that. But what is interesting to me is that there is a heavy emphasis on certain characters. And so I went through and looked at all of the chapters from the first half that we read, and I have a few numbers here for how many chapters each person gets. So I'm just going to run through the list really quickly just to kind of show the differences here, and then kind of get your guys' perspective on how you think that shaped the novel so far. And so first we have Darl, who is the second eldest, so it's Cash and then Darl. So Darl has 11 chapters. Cora, who is not part of the family, has 2. Jewel, who is one of the sons, only has 1 chapter, which was surprising to me because he gets talked about so much and there's so much significant emphasis on a lot of his past. Dewey Dell gets 3. Toll, who is Cora's husband, gets 4. Ants gets 3. Peabody, who's the doctor, just gets 1. Vardaman gets 4 above both Dewey Dell and Jewel.
Vardaman is the youngest son.
And Vardaman is the youngest. And then Cash, who is the oldest, only gets 2. That was also a little surprising to me. And then Samson, who is somebody that they meet during their travels, gets 1 chapter as well.
I didn't even know anything about Samson.
So...
I didn't even realize there was a Samson.
I didn't either. I didn't even remember that there was somebody named Samson.
Well, he came in and he was noticing them coming through, and he's talking to somebody else in town. This is like right before they are about to get to the bridge, and they kind of are helping set the stage for that, of being like, hey, all the rivers are rising. They also talked about the tendencies of the family to not, if I recall correctly, not take favors as much.
Yeah.
It was kind of to help characterize the family a little bit more, because it would be a little bit more hard to do that with just the family's perspective themselves. So I think it was kind of a way to take that out without revisiting a lot of the other characters that had come through.
What was the family, or who were the people who put them up for that evening?
I can't.
They didn't have chapters?
No, they didn't. And,
That's right.
And
I don't remember the...
And so with all of that, as you could see, Darl has a very...
it was the Tolls, I guess, that they stayed with.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So Darl has a significant amount of chapters. Do you all have any inclination as to why that would be? Do you think that that's affecting how this story is getting told? Have you noticed anything about Darl's chapters since they were so significant? Just kind of any of your thoughts about this style, because it's obviously a unique style to have it, shift perspectives this much and there's no omniscient narrator. It's always coming from somebody's perspective. So knowing some of those numbers, and if you want me to recall them, let me know. But just kind of wanted to get thoughts about that structure and how you think it's affecting the way the story's getting told.
I don't know if this is answering. You just said a lot of different questions. Okay. I have a lot of feelings about Darl because at the beginning of the book, I felt excited whenever I saw that it was a Darl chapter coming up, because I felt like his made the most sense to me.
Yeah.
And now suddenly I feel like they don't anymore. Like I took a picture of one page in one of Darl's sections that's like kind of in the middle, towards the end middle, that I suddenly was like, wait, you were the person that I trusted and that was straightforward and that I know what you're saying. And then suddenly he went into this moment of like, I don't know what I am. I don't know if I am or not. Jewel knows he is, because he does not know that he does not know whether he is or not.
This
he
happens
cannot
a lot.
empty himself for sleep, because he is not what he is and he is what he is not. And it goes just so... And since sleep is not, and rain and was, it is not. What is he saying?
This is just Faulkner writing this book
at 4 a.m.
in the morning, and
I don't
and
like,
not editing
send it off.
anything.
Like I feel like
it's fine the way it is.
I think so much of this book, you're supposed to like figure out the people to trust, because they do give you different perspectives on events of like what's happening. And Darl was the person that I trusted, but then also every other chapter people keep talking about how like Darl's the weird one, and that's the one that people always look at and whisper about. And then suddenly Darl's chapters get into that kind of nonsense where I'm like, oh, he is the weird one. Do I trust him?
Yeah.
Is he fine?
And he has the most chapters
And he has
now,
the most
too.
chapters.
And that's the thing, is it frames a lot of your understanding of the story anyway. So even finding that out later, you're thinking back of like, how much of this story has actually been told by Darl thus far?
Yeah.
And like, if he's the weird one, how is that skewing the novel? I find that very interesting.
And why is he the weird? Like, I want to understand because they keep calling him queer, which in the 30s would just be like, you're odd. And at the beginning, I didn't understand why, because he seemed the most straightforward out of anyone. And I still don't think that we really know why he's weird, other than maybe he's kind of quiet around other people.
Yeah, I don't know that I have any issues significantly with Darl specifically, other than like getting informed by other people. But that's also the thing, is that, you know, as much as we're getting informed by Darl of what's going on, we're also getting informed by other people about what Darl is. And so how much can you trust that? Especially in seeing that some of these other characters do seem to have flaws that seem more readily apparent. Off the top of my head, like with Jewel, for instance, I feel like there's been multiple people that have kind of put Jewel's character into question.
Like, he's super selfish.
And they are kind of presenting him in such a way that like maybe he has more of an attitude than he really does, which I'm not saying that is true or not. From all I can tell, you know, for getting multiple people saying these things about Jewel, presumably they are true. But, you know, that's the thing too, is that, you know, we are getting a lot of that's coming to the forefront about like, oh, Jewel isn't telling people things, especially in this family where Addie, as we learn, has such an issue with people lying, for instance, and Jewel is lying pretty significantly for a long time to get the horse. Like, those are all readily apparent flaws in his character, according to the family. But with Darl, I don't feel like I've really seen anything significant other than people just kind of talking the way that they have.
Yeah.
So...
yeah, it's surprising to me just to hear that Jewel only had one chapter, because I feel like Jewel was actually like one of the most popular subjects of the whole first half.
I was very surprised about that.
All of the other characters talk a lot.
His chapter's
they either
early,
like,
too.
Yeah, it's early. It's like the 4th or 5th chapter or something. Like,
he has the same amount of chapters as Peabody, the doctor.
Yeah.
Like, they both have one. That's insane.
But that's just so, yeah, that's crazy. Like, they do so much talking about him, and like, even talking to him, like in the procession, like one of them is like calling up to him or something. Like, they come back to that several times. Like, yeah, I don't know. That's interesting to like hear it all laid out like that. And honestly, I mean, I didn't have a good sense of like even like a dominant character, in the sense of, you know, Darl having more chapters, like on the higher side, you know, of the number of chapters. Like, he didn't necessarily feel the most dominant to me. That's kind of how I mean, they all kind of just felt a little bit chaotic. Like, it all kind of just felt like we're just switching back and forth randomly between all of these people. And I didn't feel particularly like I could rely on any of them. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. I felt like by the end, I like still knew as much about Peabody as I did about like Darl.
Yeah, and so I think that, you know, I'll definitely be keeping track of that for the back half. But just to kind of play off what you were saying, are there any main characters, or does everybody kind of feel like it's an even playing field despite all of this stuff? Do you think there's anybody that is like the moral center? Like, we've talked about some that maybe have some moral deficiencies. Is there somebody that we think is like centering this novel in some way, or is it just kind of a mix of all of them? Just curious on what you guys thought about that.
I have felt like Jewel and Darl are the most important characters.
I felt that about Jewel.
Yeah, that I felt that too, and I don't know if like maybe he is the antagonist. We don't know, but like Jewel definitely feels central to the telling of the story.
Especially where we just ended.
Yeah,
like that was actually the most coherent, specific chapter about that. That I, in my opinion, like, I mean, it was just very straightforward about him like buying the horse without telling anybody, and it felt a little more like this is a thing that happened in the past that we can all agree on. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how it felt to me, and it made Jewel feel like one of the more important characters.
Yeah, especially considering before that flashback chapter anyway. One thing that was kind of a standout thing, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but they were talking about the crossing of that river right before this flashback, and Jewel was ready to cross with his horse, but Toll, who again is not a part of the family, and maybe doesn't have as much of a obligation to help in a significant way, but for some reason he's also there with them, so like presumably there's some connection there. But Jewel was readily willing to do that, despite the fact that from other people we'd seen that it was a shady thing of how he got the horse, regardless of the way he thought it. He thought it was a pure thing of like, I earned this myself. This isn't coming from the family's money. I will feed it myself. Like, all of that are positive things. And then also in that moment, he is willing to cross with the horse and sacrifice it for the family. And so that also makes it more interesting of like Jewel being a central character. And again, like, how much are we getting influenced by other people talking about Jewel than how Jewel actually feels? Because that seems significant that he's like, I will cross with this horse.
But I think from my perspective, I see that more as like, I think that Jewel is very devoted to Addie. Like, we've seen a lot about their relationship. Like, Jewel was like Mama's little boy. And she treated him in a very like doting way compared to every other child.
And she picked up some of it. Oh, sorry.
No, there was a point, like, wasn't he the one who, like, she was like telling that she was saying he should come inside and not work because he was tired? Is that who?
Yeah.
There was a point where
because he was sleepy because he was working all night.
And she was also covering for him in multiple instances too, to not let Ants know. Everybody was just hiding Jewel's stuff from Ants, which I think illuminates a little bit about the other family members as well, because Cash and Darl knew what was going on, and they were not doing it in an accusatory way. They just wanted to know what was going on, and then proceeded to help as well.
They wanted to understand why. They thought he might have like a girl,
right?
But then but it talked really early on. Like, one of the first chapters, it talked about how Jewel was always like Addie's boy, and she really like cared for him a lot and doted on him more than anybody else. And so I think like part of Jewel doing that, like offering to go across the river, I don't think it was necessarily like, he doesn't really seem to care that much about his other family members. I feel like it has to do with like, this was Addie's wish and I'm gonna get it there. But that might be me reading into it.
Yeah,
I was leaning a little bit more toward that. I mean, just like that's how I read it. Like, he was just like, I'll do whatever it takes because it was her like last wish.
Yeah.
And so
and Ants a little bit is the same way, I think, with like, I promised her. But even like Ants is also selfish, and he keeps talking about like he doesn't sweat because it makes him sick, but really that's just a cover for him not working ever, right?
Yeah. Also, I half understood this from Spark Notes, but also I then started recognizing it. He like keeps celebrating the fact that now he can get new teeth now that she's dead. Have you? Did you pick up on that?
Who?
Ants.
Oh. Shit.
And
I have not noticed.
No, I haven't noticed that.
I like kept picking up on there were a few times where he thinks to himself, now I can get those new teeth. And I didn't pick up on that until I like was reading a synopsis of the first or second section, and Spark Notes like put it together for me, and then he says it a few more times. It's like super innocuous. It's like one sentence where he just like mentions teeth. And I think we were supposed to know at some point that he doesn't have, like, he only has a few teeth.
Yeah, I did. Okay, I do remember that being mentioned, actually, because he says something about,
it's mentioned
like,
very casually.
He can't eat like solid foods.
Yeah,
because he doesn't have teeth.
And I don't know if the implication is supposed to be, now that she's dead, I can get new teeth. But it's there
because of like insurance money. Is that a thing in the 30s?
I think it's just because there's like one fewer,
or her teeth is
like,
available.
I don't think he's taking the teeth.
You never know.
He's already in the coffin.
I know, but
hold on. I think it has to do with, I'll look it up. With just like being
like
able to
medical
afford
costs?
just being able to afford them.
Yeah.
one less person to feed so you can get some new teeth.
That's what I was assuming it was. I didn't pick up on that until I read that. I read that when I was like looking up a synopsis, and I was like, oh shit, like, is that what that is? And I guess that's one interpretation.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Interesting. So I guess for this last thing, I'll just like tee up a couple of ideas for or ideas and questions about things moving forward, and we can kind of get into final thoughts about predictions, or if you're liking the book so far, and different things like that. But one of the interesting things that was highlighted multiple times during this journey is that Addie's body was not embalmed, and they're going to be
It's getting gross.
They're going to be in a wagon with her, with significant
in southern Mississippi
heat, presumably heat. There's going to be other obstacles,
It's
obstacles,
been raining.
including the rivers getting higher, the bridges being unavailable. Do you think that that's going to? I mean, how do you think that'll play into the rest of the novel, and what do you kind of think is going to happen? Because one of the interesting things is that I've never read any novels in this genre, but this is considered on
Southern Gothic?
Yeah, it's considered Southern Gothic on multiple sites that have some analysis of the book, which that implies some sense of, in the Gothic style, that there's some foreboding themes going on, or maybe Jamie, you may be able to speak more adequately on it, but it kind of adds some sense of this suspense of what's going on with Addie, and different things that could play into how the back half of the novel goes, with her decomposing and them still having to make this trip, and there obviously being some tensions rising even at the spot that we were left off at. How do you think that'll play into the novel, and kind of play into that Southern Gothic feel? And how have you felt about the novel so far with the first half? Are you excited about the back half? Things like that. So
You always do this to me. You
General
list,
final thoughts.
You list like 15 questions.
Unless you
want to
go.
Like, oh no.
Yeah, because it's.
I can go.
I mean, it's about time for final thoughts anyway. So
I wanted to
Danny,
quickly
go.
read the Spark Notes summary of Ants. The head of the Bundren family. Ants is a poor farmer afflicted with a hunchback, which I didn't know.
Oh,
No, I
I
didn't know
had
that
no
either.
idea.
Absolutely had no idea. Very important details, by the way, listeners, are like Addie's death. Like, everything is just the same tone. It's very easy to like skip over things, in my opinion. Like,
Yeah.
it's very easy to miss things if you're not paying that close attention, because everything is spoken about in the same tone. Ants is a poor farmer afflicted with a hunchback whose instincts are overwhelmingly selfish. His poor child-rearing skills seem to be largely responsible for his children's various predicaments. Alternately hated and disrespected by his children, Ants nonetheless succeeds in achieving his two greatest goals in one fell swoop: burying his dead wife in her hometown of Jefferson and acquiring a new set of false teeth. Which is just
spoiler.
Yeah.
yeah,
Spoiler.
I mean, apparently it happens. But also, like, that's just like, I don't know. That summary even was just like painted him in an interesting light for me, because it feels like it paints him as a little more selfish than I was reading him as.
I feel like I've read him as very selfish.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I was feeling that extreme about him. I don't know. I foresee some kind of like a decomposing body in a wagon in the heat of Mississippi, like, does not sound great. And I foresee some kind of like family feud, like, around their mother's dead body. Like, it doesn't really say how often they spend a lot of time together. Like, and it's just like they're all together as a family, like, for the first time probably in, where they all have to like talk to each other and interact and like be cordial. And I just feel like it's not going anywhere super positive.
Yeah, I'd say as far as my predictions on the back half, I've liked the style so far. I kind of like needing to parse through everybody's perspectives on it, just because it just adds a sense of mystery to people's motivations, and it is interesting to not like assume what anybody is thinking about each other through just one sentence. Some of them are very much devoted of like one family member really talking deep about another family member. I think in a story that is so laser focused on one particular plot point of them taking the body to Jefferson, and apparently succeeding.
I mean, we knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, that didn't. It's more the teeth I was upset about.
Oh.
How dare
I
you?
mean,
spoil
I didn't know that they'd make it because of all the
well,
bridges and stuff.
I didn't read that as like he like achieved. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't reading that
Well,
as a spoiler.
Well, regardless, I think with the horse flashback being such a thing, because like I said, with the laser focus, anytime like a plot point gets that much focus, especially because that chapter was one of the longer chapters of the entire novel so far, and in a novel where we've had chapters that are like 1 page long or a couple pages long, this flashback was multiple pages long, and it comes after again another focus on this horse for crossing the river, and we'd already seen that Ants had some problems with the horse in the first place, and so out of any of the specifics, it seems to me that the most probable point of conflict is going to be between Ants and Jewel. That's just my prediction, just because it had already teed that up a little bit, where everybody else in the family was, even if they maybe didn't agree with how he was going about it or anything else, like the family really covered for Jewel to get this thing, to get this horse, and it was covering it up to Ants specifically, and he still wasn't that pleased about it upon finding out that Jewel got it. And so I think that that'll be an interesting dynamic where Jewel is already starting to show some signs of frustration in this process anyway. They've talked about him in the wagon and getting frustrated with the decisions anyway, and having Ants make decisions for everybody. It was kind of a weird moment of him when they were getting lodging of like not really accepting anything that would give them more comfort on this journey. When they were all in there, they were offered, I think, multiple times different comforts, including better shelter, including food, and Ants just kind of decided for everybody
that they were fine.
That they were just going to do it. They were just going to sit outside.
That felt very like prideful. I mean, it was just like a very like I've, worked and pulled myself up by my bootstraps. And I think I don't need any help.
And I think that that's going to cause tensions to rise because, again, they're also talking about this dead body decomposing. And if they are not going to be accepting, if Ants is going to impose that they're not going to accept any comforts from anybody along the way, with presumably more difficulties to get to Jefferson coming up, then they're going to be not in a good shelter. This body is going to be decomposing and smelling terribly, and I feel like the person that is going to feel the most frustrated about it is going to be Jewel. That's just the way that it's been kind of playing out, but there's a whole other half of the novel that we don't know, like what's going to come out. Like, again, Darl is a huge factor in this novel, with him having as many chapters as he has had. And so I don't know if that means that he's going to have some significant conflict or resolution with the rest of the family, but the most probable to me seems like it's going to be something going on with Jewel and Ants. And I think that that'll be very interesting to see because, again, all we know about Jewel is kind of from other people's perspectives. I'll be curious to see if he gets more chapters in the back half to kind of give his opinions on things, especially in relation to Ants himself, because I'm sure he has plenty to say in the meantime if he felt so much of a need to hide what he was doing at night from his own father. I think it'll be interesting to see why that was. I don't know if we'll get that, but I think that that would be like a perspective that I would want to see, and maybe not from Darl.
He was, and I was, and.
Darl, sit down. We don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm enjoying it so far. I think that the story itself is a little slow for me. I like the things that are actually happening realistically day to day in the story are not that exciting to me. I do like the character development, and I think it's interesting, and I have grasped onto some like certain sections. Like I think that I really like Cash. Cash is funny to me. I loved his chapter that was like a list of I made it on the bevel.
Oh yeah, it was just
that was actually his first chapter too, which I found funny. When I was looking through, I was like, this is Cash's first chapter, and how he gets introduced, his perspective is just a list.
It's just, and it's such a weird list. 8, animal magnetism. 9, the animal magnetism of a dead body makes the stress come slanting, so the seams and joints of a coffin are made on the bevel. Like, what are you saying?
Do you think that's just like he was trying to convey like the way that Cash thinks? Or like was this Cash making a list?
To me it seems like the way that Cash thinks. Like, I feel like Cash is very methodical. Like, that's also like
He's very
It seemed
he's very
sassy
focused.
to me. It seemed like it was a sassy thing because he was already frustrated with the way people were like carrying the body or like maybe rushing the process. He was just kind of like,
8,
it doesn't
animal
work, just
magnetism.
because they kept talking about the different ways of like the weight distribution, and Cash kept being, because it's shown all he was talked about from the beginning was like he's an expert craftsman.
Yeah.
And then nobody's listening to him, and then he just has this list of like, this is why it won't work. This.
But that's why
I think it's funny. I think
I
I
agree
found that
with
to be
you.
sassy and
I thought
funny,
it was funny, but I also do think it's the way that he thinks. Like, I think it's him making a list of his
definitely.
head of like, these are all the reasons why you're wrong, and I know that you're wrong, but like, this is like, that's all he does. I feel like that's all he thinks about is just like woodworking and doing a good job, and he doesn't really interact with like the family drama. Cash is the oldest, right?
Yeah, he's the eldest
Yeah,
son.
he seems pretty uninterested
Yeah,
in
he's
anything
not,
except for making the coffin good.
yeah,
Like making it,
which I think is interesting. I like him. I think he's interesting. I also really like Vardaman, the youngest, and his chapters are always so weird.
I don't understand Vardaman.
I don't either.
To be
I'm also
honest.
very curious
I get it,
about
he's a young child,
what
but
kind
he's
of
just
name
such a
Vardaman
goob.
is.
I
He's
love
kind of a goob.
Vardaman's My Mother is a Fish. I love it so much. I don't know why it's happening, but I love it.
Oh yeah, I
It's
need,
like the way that he can conceptualize his mom, I think,
know,
because
but
he's caught a
like-
fish recently, right? Or somebody caught a fish.
Yeah, and
And
like
they were having
because
it
it
for
was
dinner?
dead,
Yeah.
is that?
I think that it was a dead fish, and this is the way that
But
he can,
also,
is
Jules' mother is
conceptualizing-
a horse, according to Vardaman. So I don't know what that means.
Maybe this is just the way he's relating things in his mind. Jewel has a
through
horse,
animal relationships.
and I mean, I don't know.
Jewel and the horse quote real quick. I had this one quote that I just thought was funny. It's just like kind of shows Jewel's personality and him talking about the horse. It was page 8 for me, but he just gets pissed because the horse tries to kick him. And,
Oh, yeah, he's, like,
and
fighting with the
So then he
horse.
like slaps the horse a little bit and like kicks it and gets on its back, and then he gets all sassy with it and then gets the hay and crams it into the rack, and he says, "Get the goddamn stuff out of sight while you got a chance, you puzzle-gutted bastard, you sweet son of a bitch." I was just like,
Yeah, there's a
Jewel
scene-
talking to his horse like that. I was like, that's so amazing.
There's like a little fight scene
Puzzle-gutted
where
bastard, you sweet son of a bitch.
it's just Jewel like the series of events is just like the horse kicked him in the stomach, Jewel slapped him in the face. Like, it's just, he's like fighting with the horse in the barn, and it's, I don't know, that was, I know, I remember reading that and thinking it was funny. I like read it through and then I was like, wait, I got to the end and I was like, wait a minute, is this a horse? I had to like go back and make sure that I was reading it correctly. I was like, did somebody else come into the barn? Like, is he fighting a person?
It was just like simultaneously so fiery and pissed, but also sweet. You
Sweet
sweet son of a bitch. Just like, all right, I can appreciate that.
Finish my final thoughts. I feel like I've read a decent amount of like Southern Gothic type literature, or I don't know if I actually have read that much, but I've read a lot of Flannery O'Connor, and she's a staple. I've read one Faulkner short story before, A Rose for Emily, which is great. And I feel like in the stories that I've read, there is a lot of character development, but there's also like a lot more going on.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I've been a little disappointed by that, of like, it's just okay, this woman died in kind of an anticlimactic way. Like, she's been sick for a long time and she just passed away and whatever. And now we're trying to get over a river. And that's fine.
Yeah. I feel like to me, it seems like there's going to be more in the back half.
Yeah, I do think that there will be more. I'll be interested to see what happens. But it is interesting to bring it up as like a Southern Gothic, because I know that it falls under that style, and I don't actually know how to define that style for myself, even though I feel like I've read a lot of it, and I've always loved it.
I'll bring a definition next time to start the discussion, just to like see how it's actually defined, like academically, I suppose.
Also feels much different to me than all the other like Southern, quote unquote, Southern Gothic things that I feel like I've read.
And I don't have much experience with them, so I don't have any context except for this, really.
Yeah.
So many works. I'm just like reading his Wikipedia right now, and there are just so many Faulkner things.
And this was 5. This was number 5 for novels.
Yeah. So I'm enjoying it so far. Like, I do. It's a quick read. It's a little confusing, but I like the structure a lot. The short chapters, I always like short chapters. And I do like getting other people's perspectives throughout it. And like I said, like some of the chapters just are funny to me, like Cash's List and Vardaman's one sentence.
I appreciate the humor in the midst of such a heavy subject matter. I think that there is still some humor here. Yeah. A little bit.
I definitely think so. It's dark humor.
Yeah, definitely dark humor.
But it is humorous.
Yeah.
So I'm enjoying it. I'm excited to see what happens. I don't know that it'll be anything like insane. I do think it's going to be still a pretty tame story. Yeah. I think there will be more action, but
it'll be like in the same tone as
yeah.
everything. Like I don't know.
It'll be more like familial relations action rather than like someone gets shot, which I feel like most Southern Gothic things that I've read, it is like someone is murdered. Like there's always there's
still time,
a lot of stuff
somebody's
happening.
already died, so
yeah, the dying already happened.
We're
done. Just happened way early.
Those are my thoughts.
Cool. Well, with that is the end of the first episode of season 2, dude.
Season 2, baby.
Season 2, dude. That's super exciting. We'll be back soon with part 2 of As I Lay Dying, and just as a reiteration for the next 2 books as well, we'll just go around.
Sing Unburied Sing by Jasmine Ward,
and Rabbit Run by John Updike.
So if you want to do some homework ahead of time, that's what we're working with, and we will be back with that with the second half, and we're excited to get this rolling. 7 more books, y'all.
Strap in.
You still strapped? You still strapped? You still strapped?
I've never been more strapped.
I'm so strapped.
We will. Oh, are we still scatting season 2?
I don't know why you're looking at me. That's Danny's thing.
Are we still scatting season 2?
I mean, I'll scat us out.
Hit it.
A squeeby-dooby. A bop.
Man, very upbeat for this novel.
Starting with squee.
We will catch you next time.